I love reading stories of great exploits of faith, about the lives of men and women who risked reputation and ruin because they understood what it meant to take God at His word. They were people in their generation who were clear about who God is and His mission, and they were therefore clear about who they are and their mission. Each story was hugely costly, and often those who were involved had no idea of the fruitfulness that would follow. They were simply being faithful in the moment. Over and over again, however, they proved the faithfulness of God through fearless faith, often against a backdrop of unique moments, challenges, and opposition, and always going against the flow of culture. A few years ago, before my granddad died, I remember so clearly he said to me, the church often makes a mistake of thinking that it is only sometimes in need of renewal, when in fact the church is always in need of renewal. And if that is true, then the church in every generation is to adopt the same posture of fearlessness, asking the why, what, and how of the mission of God in their own generation. The people of God must be eager to respond to God's invitation to disrupt the status quo, paving a way for a fresh move of the Spirit, not because they have it all together, but because they are hungry for God's presence and His kingdom. However, many of us instinctively love to exist in the comfort zone. We love our traditions and the familiar safety of low expectations. We're happy to read the stories of people who risked it all for God, but have no sense in ourselves that God has invited us into the same story for the same purpose. The consumer culture we are immersed in has therefore done a great job of being a siren call to our desire for comfort and safety. And rather than causing the church in our generation to be sharpened in knowing who she is and what her mission is, it has worn away at much of what makes the people of God distinct, radically distinct from the society around us. We have, bit by bit, allowed the culture of consumerism to creep into the church to the point that we often think of church as something I go to and take from, rather than something I am for the purposes of God's kingdom. And sadly, history is littered with eras where the church became invisible, lazy, and lifeless. But history is also dotted with era-defining moments that lit up where the people of God responded to God in a radical way that shifts the narrative not only for that generation, but also the course of history. God uses moments like we are in now to awaken His people and bring renewal in the church in order to bless the nations. And I have no doubt that this pandemic that has swept through every corner of the globe almost overnight will be seen in years to come as another defining moment on which the church pivoted as it responded to God. It is a moment in which God is inviting us afresh to Himself in order to see and experience an unprecedented move of His Spirit in the nations of the earth through shifting the culture and story of the church in our generation. As we found ourselves as a team talking about how and when we may begin to regather again as a church family and what it looks like for us to have online content, we've become convinced, in fact, that this isn't the key issue for us, but that God is showing us that we are not to return back to the same patterns and expectations we had before. But in order to do that, we need to embrace a new culture of the same fearless expectation that defined the lives of those who saw mighty moves of God in their own generation. A culture that starts with a deep desire to pursue the presence of God. In essence, what we need is to reculture ourselves from comfort and consumer to radical, obedient discipleship. We need to learn to take God at His word. The question before us, therefore, is will we allow God to come and stir our prophetic imagination and dream what it would look like if the church was to respond to God in this moment in faith? If you and I were to respond in the same way as the heroes of faith we read of. As we've begun to let God do this with us as a team, God is putting a fresh desire and excitement in us to abandon the status quo of comfortable consumer Christianity that we've become so accustomed to one of radical discipleship and mobilization. Our heart, therefore, is that we are wanting to be totally responsive to God in this moment, not holding anything sacred that shouldn't be, and confidently calling us as a church family to step up and respond in the days ahead. This is not simply a case of making changes to how we do things. Yes, we will need to make changes to how we operate in the days ahead, but it would be a mistake for us to think that simply making structural changes is what it will take to cause us to embrace the culture required for the new era. Instead, to navigate this new era, which is so unfamiliar to us, we're going to need to adopt and learn a new radical way of being and thinking that will carry us forward, establishing new expectations, new priorities, and new preferences, learning to fuel our prophetic imagination. The first thing we need to do, therefore, as God's people, I want to call us to, is to rekindle a deep personal hunger and love for the presence of God in our own lives through a renewed desire for prayer and God's word. The great thing about this is that it doesn't need to wait until we regather as church. Embracing a new culture as a foundation of our togetherness is challenging because it starts with a decision of the will. It is not simply making some changes to how we meet, but the challenge is so worth it because God always revives his people in order to reach the world.